Hey y'all, this is Erica with Students of Life Podcast. If you're finding value in the Students of Life Podcast, we'd love your support. Your support allows us to grow and continue bringing you meaningful content. You can show your support by checking out our exclusive merchandise at studentsoflifepodcast.com. Every purchase not only gives you something unique to wear, but also directly fuels the podcast growth. Prefer to donate? That's cool. Just hit the donate button on our homepage. Every bit of support helps us expand, reach more listeners, and dive even deeper into the topics that matter most to you. So, in this being the first time that Courtney is not here, I don't know how viewers are going to take it. We'll see what happens, right? But I did know that it was important to get somebody on here who I trusted, who I cared about, and who I knew had a lot to offer. That's what matters to me, right?
Right.
Like your bio alone is pretty amazing. I'm gonna just read for people. Let folks know who Doc is, right? So today we are honored to be in the presence of a master storyteller, a historian who doesn't just teach the past, he makes it breathe, shout, and dribble down the hardwood of memory. Dr. Keith Wood is a 30-year veteran of the classroom, grinding and currently shaping minds in the social studies department at Christian Brothers High School. Shout out to the brothers.
All right.
But we have to be honest, right? Although you're a white man who teaches history, your story goes far past that. You surpass that by far. You're definitely not an average teacher. Being someone that had you, I can speak to that. Knowing that you grew up in New York, amongst different cultures and perspectives, where you came from what we would consider an inner city.
Right.
Right. And being there, you learned about race, sports, and now being someone who's from up north, you now have, but not just a northern identity, but also a southern identity.
Absolutely.
Right.
The other day, I was out shopping with my wife and we were having a conversation about Negro Leagues baseball. And I was at Lids and I was trying to explain to the young brother that was there looking at the hats with me. I said, well, we're from Memphis. And my wife looked at me. And I think that's the first time in our 30-year marriage that I actually said I'm from Memphis and I'm not from New York. So she appreciated that. She held me to it. As quiet as she is, she was like, oh, really? Where are you from again? And so she tells me all the time that I've lived in Memphis longer than I've lived in New York. I left New York at 22. So I've been in Memphis for almost 31 years now. So there's a nice gap there. So I actually have been adopted by Memphis. The 901 has adopted Keith Wood, and I had some great experiences and some opportunities to teach and to coach throughout the city, inner city schools, county schools, private schools. And just those opportunities have shaped me as a historian and as a teacher.
So being that you taught at all of these different institutions, which institution would you say had the most impact on you? Like not just as a teacher, but as a white man in Memphis?
I think at 22, I probably thought I could come in and change the world. I had very little understanding of the culture of the city of Memphis. To be honest, for your listeners out there, Keith Wood had to pull out a map. It was before Google, so I actually had to pull out an atlas and figure out where Memphis was in Tennessee. I knew where Tennessee was. I knew about Elvis Presley. I knew that Martin Luther King was assassinated here. I knew that I was a big fan of sports. So in the 80s, I knew that Memphis Showboats had played in the USFL, and I knew about Reggie White a little bit. And that was it, right? It was very minimal. But I was willing to come to the Memphis City Schools and to give it a try. To go back home wasn't an option. I wasn't going to fail. To go back home I didn't want to move back into the neighborhood where I grew up. I needed to find who Keith Wood was, and Memphis nurtured that. I was able to land a teaching job. I was able to be an assistant basketball coach for a couple of years, and then get the head coach at the varsity. And then really in that time, figure out who I was as both a teacher and a coach, a mentor, all those things. And to be honest, a lot of the times I used the fact that I was from New York, that I did have a different identity, the construction of who I am and where I came from. You mentioned being from New York, right? So Schenectady is a very much like you take New York City and then you go up 2 hours. It's an industrial town. There are Italian neighborhoods, Irish neighborhoods, Polish neighborhoods, each with their own Catholic parishes. There's the Black neighborhood, and then they threw us all together at one high school. And it was a huge melting pot. So I had to find my way there. And here I am, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and I'm the other. And how do I navigate that? How do I figure out who I am? And what I found out is I could just be me inside of that community. And then I was embraced by Italians, Poles, Irish, African Americans, and the brotherhood, the community. And that's how, when I look at students, I don't see A or B, I just see a kid, because in my neighborhood, we were just all kids and we all weren't the same. Right. And so, not that it was a utopic experience, because there were definitely challenges. But I think that really impacted the way that I saw the world. And then my mother just taught me to love people for who they are. And I think that's pretty important. Like, if we can just look at somebody across the table and just love them for who they are and not put some kind of social norm that society expects us to have, then we can be better people.
That's beautiful. You and I share the same thought with that. We discuss that all the time, right? Right. People are people. I don't care if you are part of the LGBTQIA community. I don't care if you are white. I don't care if you are Black, if you are of Latino descent. It doesn't matter to me, right? As long as you are not a horrible person, I will stand with you, period.
I think all of us can agree with that, right? I think if we would just look at the person, like I said, look at the person on the other side of the table or the room and just see that person for who they are, right? Like, we all have struggles. We all navigate. Growing up in the neighborhood I grew up in is because my father had issues with mental health, right? When I was 22, I probably ran from that. But I think it was a piece that, helped me grow, and I had to figure it out, right? My father couldn't keep a job, so we lived in the neighborhood we lived in. My paper route was in the Steinman's Homes, which was a federally funded housing project. So at 12 years old, I'm walking through the projects, throwing papers every afternoon after school and then on Sunday mornings, right? And collecting, and it was a neighborhood between the housing projects and what we called the Hill, which was Hamilton Hill, which was where predominantly the Black neighborhood. And when I collected money, I just saw people. I didn't see what everybody had, white, Black, Irish. I just saw people and just treated them like people. And when that happened, they treated me the same way, just as a person. And I think if we could just do that, right, then I don't think I really saw how people treated us differently from that neighborhood till I got to high school. And then we started to leave our neighborhood and play schools in other neighborhoods or private schools. And some of the experiences that coming out of a high school gym in Troy, New York, we'd given a school. It was a private school, Catholic Central. We'd given them, beat them by 8 to 12 at their house. And, just giving the biz. It was a packed house, great atmosphere, right? Then on the way out, a number of parents and the kids referred to my friends with the N-word. It's the first time I really experienced that. I think I was like 16 or 17, and it hit me. And I was like, what's going on? And I'm on the bus, and then they continued. And I remember the emergency door in the back of the bus. Remember the old yellow school bus? They lifted the red handle, and we're in January in New York. There's like a foot of snow on the ground, and these guys are all wearing Timberlands. And I just remember 3 or 4 of my teammates going out the back door and chasing down parents who were yelling the N-word at them. And I remember my basketball coach, who's Italian, Gary DeNola, running out the front to get them back in line before it escalated. And at that moment, I struggled with, why are these people doing this? Like, these are my brothers. We sweat blood and tears on that gym floor it was Mount Pleasant High School. And I didn't understand why, because we beat you by 12. Now, before the game, we were cool. But now after the game, my friends have become the N-word. And how do you navigate that? And that started for me, that game. I think really it was that game, my junior year in high school, that started me asking a lot of questions. And I think from that time at 16 to where I am today in my life at 53, I'm still asking questions, and I'm still seeking the answers of, why do people treat someone that doesn't look like them so poorly? And when I teach, my job is to expose those places the way where that's happened in history, to keep it real, and to ask this question, why? And then to ask the next question, how can we do better? And I hope as a student that I didn't just expose you guys to the negativity that was there, because that was real, but did I also show you that we can do it better? Like, this country, what makes this country great is that there's hope for the next generation. Mm-hmm. Our kids, now my grandkids, because I have a granddaughter, are going to do better than I did, than my generation did, because we made a lot of mistakes along the way. I think we did better than my parents did. And I think that's the hope that this country offers. And really, Martin Luther King says it best. He says, just be true to what you said on paper. And really, that when you think about that, if we would just be true to the ideals that the founding fathers set up, and there's a lot of problems with the founding fathers, right? They're not scot-free. They had issues. But what the ideas they put on paper, if we just live up to those, then this country has an opportunity to continue to get better.
I like the idea of that.
Yeah,
the idea is beautiful. But
absolutely.
As we know, ideas and reality are something completely different.
Oh, agreed.
And the current times that we're living, unfortunately, are showing us that.
Right.
Right. But you are a person who I can say, you are probably the wedge where academics meets accountability, mm-hmm. right? Because we have had conversations before where you told me, kid, look, white people did this. They did this. This happened. It shouldn't have happened, but let's talk about it.
Right.
And that, I think, for me, that's one of the greatest reasons why I respect you, that comma, but let's talk about it.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think a lot of educators today, they try to steer clear of that. They leave the hard conversations for somebody else, but these hard conversations are not being had, and I think it's important to ask, when going through this, right? Like for you, for instance, you're a white male, right? But you have a PhD in history, but your area of study was African-American history.
Correct.
Right? So being someone who has studied this, whose story is it to tell? Right? Like, and how do you talk about Black history, Black stories without exploiting Black pain?
Right. So this past weekend, I had the opportunity to go to Nashville and speak at the Tennessee Museum on my latest book that came out June 2024, The Memphis Red Sox, a Negro Leagues history. And as we started that conversation in Nashville, the moderator and I were going through some very basic stuff, introductions, all that. And I said, first, let's start here. This is not Keith Wood's story. This is a story of Black South Memphis. This is the story of Black economic nationalism. This is the story of the players that played in the Negro Leagues. This is a story of the fans who sat at Martin Stadium. I'm the storyteller. And one of the things that I have to confront as a historian is I have to step out of my shoes and into the lived experiences of the people, the owners who were all Black, the players who were all Black, and explain their experiences. My job is to share their story, not to craft it, not to shape it, move it. What were they thinking? What were some of the things going on? And I think that becomes challenging because in the city of Memphis, there are so few records of Black voices. I was just at a recent event with Dr. Charles McKinney over at Rhodes College, and they are collecting stories right now from the Black community. And it's really exciting to get the actual voices. It's grassroots. It's starting at the bottom. But when I was writing the Memphis Red Sox book, there was a documentary done in the mid 90s over at the University of Memphis. And they interviewed a large number of these players. And they interviewed like B.B. King, Rufus Thomas, some other folks that were fans that are in the music industry that you may know, Charlie Pride, right? And I used the transcripts, actually. I went old school, went back to the U of M library, pulled out a VHS machine that was a TV at a VHS machine, and I just listened to their voices. Because if I'm going to tell this story, I can't tell the story from Keith Wood's perspective. I had to tell the story from the story of Verdell Mathis, who pitched for the Memphis Red Sox, or Larry Brown, or Casey Jones, or Bob Boyd, right? I needed their voices, and I had to be very intentional with that. Some of the families that I talked to be honest, were a little hesitant because other historians that look like me have taken advantage of the Black community and their stories, right? So you have to build a relationship. You have to build a rapport. And I think, Erica, to be honest, those 30 years of teaching, I was able to build rapport and relationship with students. And I think that helped as I wrote both books, actually, the Memphis Red Sox and the Memphis Hoops.
Well, I know that, again, I can speak from being in your class. I took all 3 of your classes, right? My senior year was fun, I'll say that. Busy, but very fun. But good. I recall being in your class, and I recall how the classroom was set up. You know, you come through the door, there was your desk, there was a table beside your desk, there were desks with the back facing you, and there were desks with the front faced you in front of windows. Right. I remember even in class, this is 2005, right? So it's not 1965, it's not 1959, it's not 1930, something the beginning of Jim Crow. But I recall that all of the students who, we'll say, looked alike, right? We all sat together.
I think let's not even dodge that. The white student sat on one side of the classroom and the Black student sat on the other side of the classroom.
Correct.
Right. So I never dodged that. Right. And we've talked about this before, that it was a social experiment. I told you guys when you got to class, I absolutely did that on purpose. Most teachers at Millington, at your high school, were told to use seating charts. Yeah. I never used a seating chart ever. Yeah. You know, I didn't want to put you by your last name. I did not want to have that define you. So I wanted you to sit where you felt comfortable. And that became the social experiment. And so by allowing you guys to sit where you wanted to, and gals to sit where you wanted to in the middle of class, I could be like, so why'd you sit there? Well, you sat there because you were comfortable, right? Like if you had gone to Millington and you would have gone to the cafeteria in 2005 and you would have sat down, you would have found the band in one neighborhood at one set of tables, the choir, who did not like the band in any way, shape, or form, at another table. Because we did this with one of my classes. We took graph paper and we charted it, and you would have seen the football team, which would have been pretty much the entire school, right? You would have seen the baseball team, if we were going to be honest, was primarily white. Yeah. And they would have been at a different table. The basketball team was primarily Black. They would have been at a different table. So why do we as human beings do that? And that conversation was about comfort. Okay. So one of the things that I think is important in my classroom is it has to be a comfortable place to be uncomfortable. Let me say that again. It has to be a comfortable place to be uncomfortable. And if I was doing my job right, and I think I did, there were moments in my class where both yourself and your classmates, whether they look like either one of us, would have found themselves at some point in time uncomfortable because of the hard histories. Yes. And we have to confront that. And as an educator, if I refuse to confront the hard histories, right, that's educational malpractice. And we can't do that. And I think it's very important that Dr. Hassan Jeffries, you may know his brother is the Speaker of the House, the Democratic Minority Leader in the House. His brother, Dr. Hassan Jeffries, speaks about that very thing, that we have to talk about these hard histories, that we have to challenge preconceived notions. And sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable. And that's okay, because if we can be uncomfortable and we can come to an understanding, then we can grow. But if we just pick up the rug and we sweep it under there and we don't ever talk about it, then we're never going to heal and we're never going to grow and move forward.
So speaking about, uncomfortable situations and your social experiments with us, I also recall that by May of that year, the class was no longer segregated, right? So we were all mixed and mingled together. You had kids who came, you had some kids who were just those kids, right?
Right.
But for the most part, you saw salt and pepper everywhere. It didn't really matter where we sat anymore.
And I never changed the seating chart.
No, you didn't.
When you walked in and kids would come, that's my seat. I said, no, not in this classroom. You do not own that chair. You get to borrow it for 45 minutes or whatever class was back then. And I think that's important, right? Like, so in your classes and I'm glad that you remembered that, right? Because the old hat over here was like, wow, that's to me, I'm really thankful that you remembered that, because I don't remember per se that happening per year. But in that class that was there, I can say that doesn't happen every year, right? So sometimes the lesson sticks and sometimes it doesn't. But I think also as an educator, one of the toughest things to see is what impact you've had on students. Because like you said earlier, many students won't have these conversations that continue to dive deep that we have. And then until you'll see them in Walmart or Target 15, 20 years later, and they'll go, hey, Coach Wood, that class, like it was, and I think in our current moment, the facing history class that you took, I've had in the last year, right, since November, a large number of kids that said your conversations in facing history have given me a vocabulary to have difficult conversations that without the facing history class, I wouldn't be able to have in our current moment. And to me, that's a win. And it's a win-win for me as a teacher, because, I feel good that I'm getting the job done, but also more importantly, that the students, regardless of where we are in our political moment, have a vocabulary to have conversations that are going to move us in a forward direction.
Yeah, speaking of moving in a forward direction, real quick, this is the last time I'll refer back to the class, I promise, I think.
We're good.
But I vividly recall our African American history class was a class where everyone chose to mix and mingle. Our U.S. history class, those kids kept the same seats all year.
Right.
Right. And it makes me think about our current political climate and what the U.S. right now is going through as a whole, right? You have some of us, primarily millennials, everybody hates us, but we serve a great purpose.
Right.
Right. We are the generation who we're breaking traditions, and that's why people don't like us.
Right.
Right. That's why the generations before us are like, they're hell. They shouldn't be doing this. They shouldn't be doing that. Everything we do is wrong. But it's not that everything that we're doing is wrong. It's more so the fact that we're sitting down and we're realizing that the things that have served the generations before us, they don't serve us. They don't work. They're not going to work today. So things have to change. And so we're fighting for change. In this current moment, we're being silenced or trying to be silenced. Right. But that doesn't stop our voices.
No, and I think, I always tell my kids, and I hope you remember this in some way, shape, or form, history doesn't repeat itself, but it echoes.
Yes.
And I think in the 1960s, there were voices that were very loud that this country tried to quiet. And the millennials are speaking their voice. Their voice is being heard. They're challenging the paradigm. Which is good, because if you don't challenge the paradigm, there's not change, right? I think you guys need to continue to do that. And I would encourage your listeners out there that are millennials, this is your opportunity. This is your chance to be heard. And there's going to be, the generation, we talked about the 60s. If you go back to the 50s, and you're talking about the civil rights movement, where those voices were quieted as well. There was somebody that wanted to quiet those voices, but somebody had to have the courage to stand up and to do the right thing. And sometimes you watched, Malcolm X would have been considered the angriest Negro in America, or Martin Luther King. When he came to Memphis in 1968, he was blacklisted, right? Like he, by both communities, not just the white community, but the black community, had sort of looked down on Dr. King because he stayed in a white hotel, right? And instead of staying at the Lorraine, and the first time he came to Memphis, they ran him out of town. And so, there's an interesting story there with the Invaders, which is a young group of kids from Northside and Hamilton, that didn't think Martin really understood what it was like to be black and in Memphis. And so, but those kids, they were kids. They're 17 and 18-year-old kids that were standing up and talking about with their voice, using their voice to make Memphis a better place. And it was interesting as Martin Luther King goes down 78 and gets back to Atlanta. He's in Atlanta and he's watching the news coverage and he sees the violence that erupts in Memphis after he leaves. And the sanitation worker strike is still going on. And he says, I have to go back. This is the generation that needs me. I cannot be remembered as someone that had violence because he believed in passive, peaceful, nonviolent resistance. And so he returns and he stays at the Lorraine, which we know is going to be his downfall, where James Earl Ray assassinates him. But he had the courage to come back, right? And I think it's important for this generation and for the generation that follows to continue to have that courage, to continue to speak your voice, your truth, to allow some of us that are older to have to sit down and think about it. What does that really mean? And maybe these young kids, their voice is something we need to spend more time listening to.
That's a great point. If people we'll just say your generation and before you, right? If you're willing to sit down and listen and hear people out without your biases, I think that is when a conversation needs to be had about what does the line between allyship and appropriation look like at that point?
Ooh,
right? Like what does that look like? Because a lot of times you hear Black people say they love our rhythm, but they don't want our blues.
Right.
So in my mind, that's a line where you have people who want to be allies, but instead of being allies, you start to appropriate and then you assume that you know. So what does that line look like? Right.
So big Tribe Called Quest fan, right? Q-tip. Just don't prep the role. Like be you, be authentic, right? Go, listen to hip hop. Wear the clothes, right? And embrace that. But I think sometimes, don't prep the role. Like if you're listening to hip hop, but then you're voting for things that are systemically holding the Black community back, that's prepping the role because you're just using the music and the culture because it fits your need. Right. I think a lot of times, especially where I teach now at Christian Brothers High School, I try to open their eyes to Stag Studios in South Memphis, right next to Lemoyne Owen. Ask them, have they ever been to Lemoyne Owen? Where is Lemoyne Owen? Have you been on Walker Avenue before?
They have no idea.
Do you know where Lemoyne Gardens is? But that speaks to the history of our city. We've been so segregated for so long. What would it take to go over with a group of your friends and visit a Black church in South Memphis, right? Like about 13 to 15% of Christian Brothers is African American. About the same for Hispanic. Like, what would it take to go to Mass as a Catholic student at Christian Brothers with a Hispanic or a Latino friend of yours and see a different point of view, right? And I think once you can understand that you are, and then sort of like in and of the community, right? And then that's not cultural appropriation anymore, right? Just using that. And it's really important. And it's very difficult to teach, but it's important that these kids understand that this culture, when you talk about, they don't understand our blues, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and the sadness, the struggles, and that's where you have those hard conversations. And I think this past week, I was talking with my students. One of the players that's in the Memphis Red Sox book, his name is Larry Brown. His son was a Tuskegee Airman, Larry Brown Jr. And one of the families that was able to really help me craft this book on the Red Sox was the Brown family. And in a recent text thread, Dolores Brown, who is Larry Brown's daughter-in-law, and her husband was the Tuskegee Airman. And she asked this question. She goes, Keith, why did the White House take down the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. My Larry was willing to give his life for this country. And she just said, why? And so I read that thread to my students. And in that class, that particular class, there was only one African-American student. So 90% of the class was white. And I said, so why? Why do we, for political reasons, why do we take a history that is apart? The Tuskegee Airmen don't win World War II. We'll win World War II with or without the Tuskegee Airmen. Yet their success rate allowed us to win quicker, less lives to be lost, and they played an intricate role in the success of the United States military. Why would you take that story out? And that's the question I wanted them to sit there and think about. And it was really neat that day in class, for the next 30 seconds, it was pretty quiet. And I think quiet is also a great tool as well, because now you've got to think, because no longer are you thinking about, well, you know what, we need to, all this anti-DEI, take all this stuff down, and instead go about, there's Dolores, that's her family. How does she as an individual feel about her family history being erased? And, she ended the text thread with this. I'm jumping on a plane and we're going to Italy, and Italy is going to be recognizing and honoring the Tuskegee Airmen for their work in Operation Shingle, which was the invasion of Italy in 1944. And to ask our kids, why is Italy celebrating the Tuskegee Airmen, these black pilots, but here in the United States, we're removing them from history? Why is that? And I think that's important for us. That's the hard history. That's the part that we don't want to confront, that we must confront, so that we can think about that. And then when this group gets to where they are in positions of power, right, politically, in the business community, they'll have sat with these questions before. And I think that's important. We've got to continue to do that.
So it sounds a lot like, I don't know, this is probably leading to my rebel spirit a little bit, but it sounds like these are classroom reparations, right? Like maybe we don't financially give you guys the acknowledgement that you deserve or that you need, or maybe we don't care enough. Not educators, the country as a whole, right? Just want to clarify that. Not educators. Have too many teacher friends. Don't take offense.
Oh no, I think, when you talk about the classroom reparations, if you were to look at, my father-in-law graduated from Hernando High School in Mississippi in 1962. And if you were to look at his textbook in 1962, my father-in-law never went to school in the 1950s with any African-American students. He graduated from Hernando High School, and everybody that he went to high school from first grade to 12th grade, looked like him. And if you were to look at his textbook, you would not find what we have in our textbooks today. Now, textbooks are created for each state, like the Prentice Hall, other publishing companies go to the state and say, what do you want in that? So the state dictates what's in that. And if we were to look at the book that my wife and her maid of honor both went to Hernando High School as well, what they went through in the 1980s, it would have been a different book. And it would have been better than the book that my father-in-law had in the 50s, but it still would have come up short today. And we've had this conversation even in the state where your daughter's going to school right now, and here in South Haven, right? That book doesn't confront some of the hard histories. It's better than the book that my wife used. It's better than the book that my father-in-law used. And so we have to understand that people's perspectives and views, the state molded that. The book that you used at Millington Central High School.
We didn't use that damn book.
Well, yeah, it popped open the window.
Out. We signed them books out and they went back on top of the shelf. We never used them books.
It was useful for pictures. Remember, this is pre-Google.
This
was pre-Google and
use
maps.
It for maps.
Right. And so, but I think, because I could give you the story, have these discussions. And in fact, while we're talking about this, I think this is important because Millington was so diverse. One of the things that I had to sharpen Because when I was at Sheffield, the community was monolithic. Everybody looked the same.
Yeah.
Right. And when I come to Millington, that's not the case.
No.
Right. And so what I had to sharpen and hone in on was this skill. My job as an educator is to teach you how to think, not what to think. And that becomes a challenge when you're looking out in the classroom. And there are so many differences. Millington Central by far is the most diverse school I've ever taught at. And when it's not just you, there are classmates, your white classmates that still get in contact with me today and say that. In fact, one of the guys that I'm most proud of is Jonathan Moody, who is a high school baseball coach at a local high school. And he talks about 5-10 years ago, we had a sit down conversation and he was just like, look, the reason why I'm a history teacher is because the way that you taught history, and we don't sit on the same edge of the political spectrum, and that's okay. Right. Cause I never taught him what to think. I taught him how to think. And with that legacy, as he's teaching, he was originally teaching at FACS. Now he's at Arlington. Those students are going to get taught in the same manner because that's the way that Coach Wood taught at that point in time. And that, I don't know if I was really that good when you were in high school because I'd only been at Millington for 3 or 4 years. I think by the time I left in 2011, I was much more adept at that. But with experience, you get better, right? And the more conversations, the better you become.
Yeah. So speaking of passing, the idea of educating down, right? What would you say that reparative education looks like beyond just, like placards and land acknowledgments and MLK quotes? Because mind you, there were so many other great people from back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s that we could quote, that we could use. But Malcolm is not Malcolm. Lord, I love Malcolm. I don't like Martin like that. But Martin's the most digestible. He is the most digestible for white people.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Because truth be told, in my opinion, we should have far more acknowledgement of Malcolm X. But you know that.
Right.
You know how I feel about that, right?
What if, Erica, and one of my colleagues at Christian Brothers, who is African-American and teaches the civil rights class at Christian Brothers, does a great job with it, asked me this question one day, and I thought this was very poignant. What if in 1965, Martin Luther King gets shot and then Malcolm is shot in 68, right? What if King goes down first, leaving Malcolm for the next 3 years, right? And I think, that changes the dynamics, right? And you're 100% accurate with this. Martin, because of his passive, peaceful, nonviolent resistance, turned the other cheek. It's much more palatable to white America today. He wasn't palatable in 1968 because if you read the Commercial Appeal, Memphis's newspaper, he was a communist infiltrator who was a troublemaker who needed to get run out of town. Mm-hmm. Right? The sheriff's department was not a big friend of Martin Luther King being in town. When Reverend Lawson invited King to town, that created some animosity within the community. Mayor Loeb was not thrilled in any way, shape, or form that King was here and really didn't want to sit down at the table with King, right? So, I think, we have to sort of balance those right there. And I love the fact that you're much more Malcolm, and I can see that. And having known you for all these years, you're definitely much more Malcolm. And I think I am too, right? Being from New York, because one of the things I think you probably appreciated was in my class, you never had to worry about what I thought because I told you.
Yes.
I'm not looking for friends. They're in New York. I've got them. I'm not looking for your friendship. I don't need you to love me, right? I've got a wife and 3 kids. They love me. And I've got friends in New York, right? I'm giving you the truth and we're going to talk about it, right? And I think that's important. And sometimes that gets taken as, oh, he's so harsh, right? Like Malcolm, the by any means necessary was very simple because if I did it, then you get to do it. And that, especially here in the South, after, being here for 30 years, that didn't fly well, right? It
didn't really fly at all, actually. And that was the damn problem.
Right. And so now remember, when Martin goes north, He's in Chicago, and he ends up staying in the projects in Chicago for, I think, like 3 to 6 months. That was problematic, right? Like folks in Chicago are like, this isn't Memphis, right? This isn't Birmingham. This is Montgomery. And when he was in Bed-Stuy, right, in Brooklyn, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be wrong about which part of the city he was in, they ran him out of town. Right. There was an assassination attempt on him. It was very low key. It didn't make a lot of noise. But he wasn't well liked in the North because the construction of race in the North was what Malcolm talked about. It was much more like a fox, right? Like you never had to question the racial ideology of the white Southerner in the 1950s because he was very upfront with it. And he would tell you exactly how he felt and where you needed to be and what your place was in society. Welcome to Memphis, right? The segregation that's there. But in the North, it was de facto, right? Like in the South, it was de jure by law. In the North, it was by fact. Redlining wasn't just something that took place in Memphis. It took place in Detroit. It took place in Schenectady. I've actually looked at the map for redlining in Schenectady. My next book project is on a Negro Leagues team in Schenectady, and my city was every bit redlining. Redlining goes all the way through the 1980s. So my parents bought a house in 1980 as a young white couple. They were able to buy in neighborhoods that if you and Courtney were trying to buy, you wouldn't be able to buy there. Right. And I think people miss that Malcolm's animus is him striving for equality, for an opportunity. Right. And I think Martin wanted the same thing. There were two different ways to skin a cat. One worked better in the South, one worked better in the North at that point in time. Now, here's one that'll deep dive. If we're going to go there, I think the South is much more like the North in the 1960s and plays fox with its racism. I think it is very sly.
You think?
Oh, well, I think it's probably come out. The fox is a little more edgier in the last 6 months, but they're still using sanitary language. They're still code switching, right? They're using words to, instead of point blank wearing a white sheet and a hood, right? They're now using words like DEI. Or anti-affirmative action, right? Anti-DEI, anti-affirmative action, right? Instead of just saying segregation, we don't want blacks here, right? They're using words that are safe words that fit political goals. When in all actuality, they might as well just say, we don't want blacks here, right? And so they're not, in 1955, you wouldn't have worried about that because at that point in time, the segregationist in a white citizens council, all right, the white citizens councils where they're respectable, mayors, so on and so forth, where the Klan was sort of hidden, right? So you had those two organizations. You never doubted where they stood or what they thought. Whereas today, behind the words, it's there. You just have to be able to put it into perspective and you have to confront that, right? And sometimes people don't want to do that.
So I think publicly, I'll give you that. Publicly, I can see how, you would liken that to playing fox, but being someone, of color who grew up in Memphis, I know for a fact, just like Mississippi, just like Arkansas and Alabama, Georgia,
right?
Those railroad crossings and tracks still exist.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like if you go to Collierville today, literally, you'll see. You have like old money Collierville. You have the new Collierville. You don't really cross the line at old money Collierville.
No.
And that's not just a racial thing. That's a young person thing, period, right? You have these multi-million-dollar homes that have been there forever. But if you look closely, not far from them, there's a damn railroad track.
Oh, absolutely. I think, it's interesting. My father-in-law lives in Batesville, Mississippi. And when you go down into the Delta, you're on the edge of the Delta, another 20, 30 miles, you're in the Delta. And there's a set of railroad tracks, right? And there's two sides of the town, right? You've got and in fact, the railroad tracks at Batesville run right through the town square. And, it's interesting that, there's what we refer to as a cab school here in Memphis, Citizens Against Busing. So there's, Magnolia Heights is a little bit north of Batesville. And then there's another private school. And then South Panola is the public school, which is
primarily black,
yeah. Right? So, I mean, those railroad tracks exist, and it's not just in Batesville, Mississippi. If you look at in 1973, when the city of Memphis, behind a court order, had two desegregated schools, right? And they did it in the middle of the school year, which was busted at best, right? A lost school year. What happened in the city of Memphis? Well, in 1973, Harding, Briarcrest, Rossville Academy, you start naming Oak Haven Baptist, Skyview Baptist, right? All these schools popped up in these little Baptist churches. And in fact, if you read Briarcrest, their history said in 1973, we opened up looking for a more Christian experience. Well, the Christian experience they were looking for was an all-white school. Because if you look at any of the yearbooks at Briarcrest from 1973 to 1983, they're lily white, literally lily white, right? So history doesn't repeat itself, it echoes, right? When did when the Memphis City schools, and I'd have to put this into perspective, I think my Chandler graduated in 2018. I think it was probably like 2013, right around there, when Memphis City Schools gave up its charter and forced Shelby County schools to incorporate all the Memphis City schools. Mm-hmm. So you can talk about the inequities economically between the two schools, forcing Shelby County to now incorporate them. It lasted for 1 year. What happened the year after that? Arlington schools, Lakeland schools, Germantown schools, Collierville schools. So here's an opportunity for the city to come together and do what's best for the students holistically, or to take care of my neighborhood. And you just talked about the neighborhood, the railroad tracks. Yeah. Right. And so, and out of all the districts, if we're going to be honest, brutally honest, most people didn't think Millington had the financial wherewithal to make a go of it as a municipal school. And they would fall back into Memphis, Shelby County schools, but they have, right? And to me, as a historian, it's the same thing, because now Collierville, economically, those schools has resources that an East High School or even White Station, right, would love to have, but they don't, right? And that's a byproduct of the tracks, right, of the redlining, of the historical phenomenon that created what we know is the legal and de facto segregation of Memphis and Shelby County. And in fact, if you look, when does Tipton County explode north of Shelby County? If you looked at the DeSoto County schools in 1990, was there a Lewisburg? No. Was there Center Hill? No. Was there DeSoto Central? So why are these schools just south of the border in Mississippi blowing up? Because as Memphis City schools are becoming desegregated, right, and in essence resegregating as white families leave the Memphis City schools, and in fact even some of the Shelby County schools before the municipalities open up, right? Then you have northern Mississippi, DeSoto County is huge. And if we don't talk about these issues, and many of those issues we're talking about are in that book, the first book that I wrote on Memphis basketball and Larry Finch, because when Larry Finch takes the University of Memphis, or Memphis State University at the time, to the Final Four, it's in the middle of the busing issue in 1973. So when you have the mayor 1 minute is talking about we're not going to desegregate these schools. We don't need these black kids in Westwood. Like Westwood is going to be a white community. And then and the next moment when he's at Louisville for the Metro Conference champion, taking Larry Finch and Ronnie Robinson from Orange Mound, from Melrose, and going, this is what Memphis is about.
They still do that today, though. It hasn't changed.
Right. But if we can come to a better understanding of that, and see that and force the politicians to go, hold on, why you can't speak out of both sides of your mouth, right? You've got to be real with what you're saying, and you can't at the basketball game be one way, but then on Monday when you're talking about desegregating the schools be another way. And I think that's part of the problem that we haven't got over yet. And it's because we don't go back and we don't look at those hard histories.
So knowing what you know now, out of your 31 years of teaching and teaching all different kinds of students, mm-hmm. right? If you could take the knowledge you have right now and go back 10 years, right? All right. So let's dig deep for a minute.
Well, okay.
If you could take the knowledge you have right now and go back 10 years, mm-hmm. you were back at MCHS, right? What would you have done differently? Do you think you would remain in the same trajectory, or would it have changed in some way?
Yeah, I think, and I do that every so often. I think it's important to be introspective and think about what opportunities, if you asked me 30 years ago if I'd ever taught at Christian Brothers, I probably would have laughed you out of the room. I thought Parkway Village and Sheffield High School is where I would be for my entire 30-year career. When that door was closed and another opened at Millington, I said, Millington, whoa, first off, this is like the country. Like it's pretty country out there for a kid that grew up in New York, in Schenectady, where I could take my hand from my house and touch my neighbor's house. Right. So there were like no driveways between. Like these are very small houses, and now I'm out driving by cotton fields on the way to school until I actually bought a house in Millington that was part of the Bolton plantation. Right. So I'm just like, wow, I drive by cotton, and that smell in the fall is horrendous. When they spray whatever that is on the cotton, that's bad. Like it's still stuck in me. I'm like, oh my God, how do people, I thought that was it. Like I'd be there. My kids would play basketball for me. And I would just be at Millington, and then that door closed. And life has a funny way of closing one door and opening another. When I was at Sheffield and Millington, I only dreamed of being Coach Wood. It wasn't until I was at Christian Brothers where someone said, the school's going to bankroll you going to grad school and you can become Dr. Wood. And I said, you mean they're going to pay for the school? And they're like, the books too. So, excuse me. That was something that I dreamed about. And, when I got my master's in 2004, I was out of money. This teaching field doesn't pay, every other field. You're an engineer, whatever you are, you owe that to a teacher, but it doesn't pay you. Have you ever done the math? So if as a teacher, I have 25 students and I get $10 an hour for those 25 kids, we have 6-hour school days and we teach 180 days. I should make $272,000 a year.
Jesus.
That's what I should make if I was just getting a babysitter rate for that. That's how we treat educators. And so as an educator, what was I probably making? $35,000 or $40,000 a year at Millington Central. I knew I didn't have the money to go back and get my PhD. And so when I moved to Christian Brothers and they were willing to bankroll that, here's an opportunity for me to become Dr. Wood. When I did my comps for my master's, we highly recommend you. And I appreciate that. That's great. I'm out of money. And so teaching at Christian Brothers, the economic privilege of the private school allowed me to chase a dream I really don't think I dreamed for myself before then.
It's interesting. It's very interesting, that you say that, because when you think about the economic difference, right? Mm-hmm. The gap between private schools, public schools, even public schools in the suburbs, like we said, Collierville, Germantown, Lakeland, Arlington, versus inner city schools, the pay gap for the people who work there and who live there are exponentially different, right? So how do we offer these kids an equal education? What does that look like? In my mind, being someone who has been to both an inner city school, because I went to Fraser High School for a little while, that didn't work out at all.
I can understand.
But I went to Fraser High School and then I went to Woodstockton, Millington, right? But I had friends who were at West Side, who were at North Side. I had friends who went to, Hamilton or BTW. The economic difference in these schools versus the type of education they received was an enormous gap.
I think what we're doing right now, that's really scary in the state of Tennessee. The state of Tennessee is pushing vouchers, which is going to take the remaining students whose parents desire better for their kids and have a little bit of financial wherewithal to take the best students out of the public schools and move them into the private schools, which is not going to be, first off, when a student of color comes into a private school, it's problematic. When an African-American parent or a Latino parent drops their kid off at a private school, they know there are challenges. There's going to be things that happen. There's going to be racial issues. It's going to come from classmates. It's going to come from teachers, maybe not openly per se, like it was 1955, but there's going to be some problems. But the parents that I've seen at Christian Brothers for 15 years that are Latino or African-American, their parents understand that and they're willing to make that sacrifice for those students to see success. Now, if we have these vouchers, and because I taught in the public schools for 17 years, I'm not a fan because you're going to take the best students out of the public schools, put them in private schools where it's going to be challenging. It's not going to be the same culture that they had. And in fact, I've had a number of students. I've got a young student in my classroom right now. He's actually zoned to go to Sheffield High School. He's at Christian Brothers. He was at Mace, and he would have been the valedictorian or the salutatorian at Mace. But his mother, who graduated from Sheffield herself, right, said, that's not the best option. I want him to go to Christian Brothers and be challenged. And he's doing well, but he's not going to be the valedictorian or salutatorian. And he's doing better than if he was at Mace. But there are some challenges that he's having to navigate that are there, where if you had left him at Mace or at Sheffield, he's the valedictorian or salutatorian. Did you know that the University of Tennessee at Martin will give the salutatorian and the valedictorian of your high school class free rides?
I had no idea.
Right. So when we take these students from these schools that aren't producing the higher test scores, which is essence what it becomes now, like you've now being judged not by who you are as a student, but who you are on that one day on that test, that is a money-making machine because you took the end of course test in U.S. history, and Pearson brought Coach Wood to Nashville, put me up in a 4-star hotel. I reviewed questions and gave me 15 cents a mile to travel from Millington to Nashville to look at that state test. There were 15 of us in this room. There were 5 other tests. How much money did Pearson pay to have educators review the questions?
How much? We'll never know.
We'll never know. And then so here's the deal. That then gets turned around to the state of Tennessee, which is paying Pearson for the state test. And now they issue the state test and they're like, well, this determines whether teachers taught that year. No, it doesn't. Because if we talked about this before, like the last 2 weeks of class, I specifically reviewed everything that was going to be on that test and prepared. I taught to the test. Now, when you were in class during the rest of the year, I taught.
Yeah.
Right. And so we would cover all of that stuff. Now, there are some teachers in public schools that are just teaching to that test every day. So instead of teaching kids how to think, they're teaching kids what to think. And that's where students can't problem solve that way. Right. And so this whole system where state tests dictate how we judge public schools is ridiculous. And I think a lot of times, if we're going to continue this conversation with schools, let's go there. A lot of folks are like, well, there's too much government intervention. Well, then why is Nashville and Memphis's educational business? Why does the state legislature in Tennessee want to shut down the Memphis City School District? And they want to dictate what is the curriculum for the Memphis City schools. right? That doesn't fly with the less government. That's actually more government. That's more government intervention. If school districts are designed to teach their communities, then allow those districts to teach those communities. What they need is funding.
Absolutely.
They need funding. And that's where the thing, and that's where the problem comes in, because they're not equally funded. And when it's based on tax dollars, how much does a house cost in Collierville?
Oh, the low end?
Yes.
Maybe $400,000 on the low end.
What's a house cost in Parkway Village?
$30,000.
Good. Where's the tax base? So that's where the money's going. So you can't say that, well, we're giving everybody an equal percentage. That's not equitable.
Not at all.
Because Collierville is going to have more money than Parkway Village. And they're going to be like, well, these Collierville schools are so good. Well, they're funded, right? Fully fund students across the board. And that's where, for me, that's problematic in education today. And the voucher system is only going to create a greater divide between public and private. Those schools in what we call Memphis, Shelby County now are going to suffer immensely as this voucher program continues. Now, that being said, the voucher program for me personally, the more of these kids that use the voucher, the more students come to Christian Brothers, creates job security. But if we're really, to me, I don't think that's the bigger issue. The bigger issue is, are we educating the students of our community as best we can? And we're not.
We're not, and a lot of people, they tend to mix up, equitability versus equality. It's not the same thing.
Right.
Right. And I really want people to stop using the damn word equality, because equality means all kids have a school to go to.
Right.
That's equality. Right. Now, how you make it equitable is, so I put these kids from, we'll just say, keep using Sheffield, right?
Yeah.
From Sheffield, or kids from Central, and I give them the same exact opportunity as those kids in Collierville or Arlington, right, or Lakeland, in those districts. That's how you make things equitable. But how do you do that when you have educators who do not want to teach at these schools? Because not only are they being watched by the administration inside these schools, now you have the state
right
on their ass left and right. Right. So no matter what a teacher does, there's a mistake.
And I think, the other thing that happens, and I've watched this at Sheffield personally, because I'm still in contact with the community, is that when the state comes in and they say, well, you guys don't have the right test scores, and they remove the entire staff. They did that about 10, 15 years ago. When you remove the entire staff, you took away teachers that had taught at that school for 30 years, that had built community. And I could give you a series of names that, if I gave you these 5 names, students graduated from Sheffield between 1975 and 1995 would know all 5 of them, because they were always there. They were their mainstays. This is what makes Christian Brothers a special place. When alumni come back, there are teachers that have been there for 15, 20, 25, 30 years, and we celebrate those. And they have alumni reunions, and every football game on Friday night has a different alumni group coming back from the year that they graduated. But if we take that community away from, say, a Sheffield, and we have the teachers are no longer there, and the alumni come back and they're not connected in any way, they're not going to want to give back. Right. And so there's a lot of systemic issues that revolve around that are deeper conversations. Right. We could do this for the next 2 or 3 hours and continue to look at and analyze the issues that would help these schools get better. Really, as a teacher, I wish I had more pull. I think when I do post, we've talked about this on social media, a lot of the posting that I do that is very public is about education, because I'm a 31-year veteran, and I've been in the 3 different unique school districts, right? Like the city, the county, and the private. And it's sad for me when people in charge that have zero experience in education are making decisions on a systemic level that are harmful to kids across the board.
So your opinions today have been, I know to be PG, right? Mm-hmm. But before we wrap up, I do want to ask you this question.
Okay.
And I want you to be open and honest.
All right.
Right? What truth are you holding back out of politeness? Like, if you could say, this is one main thing that I want to say, or one feeling that I have that I haven't said, what is it?
Man, that's a tough question. You sent me these questions earlier, and that's the one that I balked at earlier, right? So now you're being the teacher. The shoe is on the other foot. To be honest, like, how do we? We've talked about this because for me, it's about education. How do we fix this system? How do we allow students, what pains me, and I think you might recall this, like when you walk into class the first week, I was like, yes, my name is Coach Wood, but if you think I'm showing videotapes all day, you've picked the wrong spot.
Yeah.
Right. How do we hold teachers accountable that they're there not to get a paycheck, not to be there from 8 to 3, but they're there for the betterment of the kids? And I think, we've talked about the systemic issues, right? We just got done talking about some of the systemic issues at the state level in Tennessee. But on the grassroots level, right, if we're going to require teachers to do their job, let's hold them accountable, but let's also pay them appropriately, right? Like, I remember my basketball coach in high school saying, Woody, like, this is the most honorable profession. I'm so proud of you to go into this profession. I'm not going to make 6 figures ever doing this.
Right.
And so why is that? Why is that as a 31-year educator with a doctorate degree, if I were to post something on Facebook, I would get a large number of responses from people that have never stepped a foot in the classroom. They've never subbed. They've never taught a class, but they have the answers to solve the problem because of what they saw when they themselves were in school. And to me, that's problematic, right? I think if I'm going to say something, I'm like, I thought, I really, when my vote the first place I look when I vote is, how do you feel about education? Right. And if you don't line up with how I feel about education and where that money needs to go and that the importance of public schools, then you're not there. There's a lot of other issues that are out there, and I don't want to minimize the other ones. But for this educator, education is first and foremost how I look at a candidate. And so, politically speaking, I'm not real thrilled right now that the Department of Education, if you said, what would I hold back on? The Department of Education has issues. I think it probably could. It has some graft. It has some issues that could be solved. I think money is probably needs to be tightened up a little bit, but to wholesale remove the Department of Education, one of the things they're going to do is, if they do that, if the Department of Education disappears, IEPs will disappear. If you've ever taught and you've ever had a kid with an IEP, one of the reasons why we chose to leave our Chandler at Millington Central and not take him to Christian Brothers. And one of the perks of teaching at Christian Brothers, my other 2 boys went for free. They had full tuition rides because I teach there. Right. I could have sent my middle son to Christian Brothers, but I said, no, the best place for him is Millington Central High School because he is autistic. He has an IEP, and the level of support that he received from the administration and the teachers was there. Now, if you take away the Department of Education and you want to be real with this, that IEP disappears. And this is not a Republican or a Democrat thing. Think of it. It's across the board. People have students with IEPs that need, whether they have dyslexia, they struggle with, reading, they struggle with, they're all over the board, right? In fact, all 3 of my sons had IEPs. My 2 sons, my bookends, were, what's the term I'm looking for? Had an IEP for exceptional, students, right? Like, so what was the program? Apex program, in Shelby County schools, right? Mm-hmm. And so those are IEPs too. That means those programs disappear. So if the federal government takes the money that they were sending to the states to make sure that these federal mandates were followed, the next question is this: will the state of Tennessee continue funding on the same level that they have been doing? And the answer is absolutely no. I don't trust them. So if there was something I was ducking, right, my fear is that when you eliminate this Department of Education, this state, if that was the case, the Memphis City schools would have been fully funded. What do you think their state's opportunity The state of Tennessee doesn't have an income tax. That is so regressive. Like, I realize I come from New York, and New York State is probably one of the most heavily taxed states. But even my inner city education in New York was better than probably what most kids got at Collierville. Right? Let's be blunt about that. The money in New York goes to education. Right? And yes, you pay more tax dollars. The roads look better. Right? The services that the state offers are better. Why? Because there's taxes. Like, Tennessee does not have an income tax. Oh, by the way, for the heck of it, you know what Mississippi just did? They got rid of their state income tax. And so when you get rid of the state income tax, instead of being equitable based on the amount of money that you make, you now have to take those, find those tax dollars somewhere. And so in states like Tennessee, when you go buy groceries and gas, you pay an extra tax. And so what's going to happen in Mississippi is that money, that doesn't hurt the person that makes $500,000. The person that makes $50,000 or less, $30,000, that person now has more taxes on their groceries and on their gas. What just happened to them? That's regressive, right? And so if we're regressive in our taxes here in Tennessee and in Mississippi, are we really going to fund education? No, we're looking for places to cut that and have less taxes. And so instead of running from supporting education, and there are other programs that need to get supported, it just so happens to be the Dr. Wood's an educator, right? Then do it. And if that means I have to pay a couple more dollars in taxes, I'll do it. But in reality, Erica, how many people are going to be like Dr. Wood and go, oh yeah, I'll pay more tax dollars. That's better because it's not better for me.
It's better for the whole.
For the whole. And I don't worry about the whole. I worry about myself.
Right.
And that's where we, as a people have failed, as a nation have failed in that mentality.
But that is where we as a nation will always fail, will continue to fail, simply because American culture is that of individuality. That's just point blank period what it is.
Absolutely. Right. And it saddens my heart that, I think President Jimmy Carter said this: if you want to judge our democracy, look at how our democracy treats the least in that democracy. And so, when you look at that, right, President Carter, for whoever he is and however you want to judge him as a president, spent his life giving back to people, right? He truly became a carpenter, right?
He did.
He was the carpenter. And for me as a Christian, right, this is where I'll share my faith a little bit. He walked and talked, and you knew just by watching him as a man that that's a Christian. And there's too many Americans today that claim to be Christians that do not walk and talk. And in fact, if we're going to say stuff you didn't want me to put out there that you said I was a little leery of, how many evangelical Christians would deport Jesus today? And
all of them.
Yeah. That's where we have an issue. That's the problem, that we want our Christianity to defend our capitalism instead of allowing our Christianity. Mahatma Gandhi said it best. He goes, no, I love your Christ. I've read your Bible. He's a great dude, but I've met your Christians. I don't like them so much. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think there's far too many in our country that, and it saddens me as a Christian, that there are far too many people that use their Christianity to defend their capitalism versus just being a Christian and walking and talking like the man you read in the scriptures is. And I may not be perfect, but I attempt to get as close to that as possible. And I hope that I'm better today than I was yesterday. And I think those are conversations that people don't want to have. And you asked me, where would I shy away from? So instead of shying away from it, that's it. So hopefully, did I go where you were headed with that one?
You did. It was just, honestly, it was more so something to close this out, to leave people with something to think about. Right. It's good to be introspective, and it's good to think about yourself and where you fit in.
Right.
Right. And ask yourself the hard questions. Make sure that you are questioning yourself, your morals, your ethics. That is the only way to be a better person.
Absolutely.
That's the only way to facilitate self-growth. And that matters to me more than anything else. So if I can have someone that I look up to sit down and think and say, well, damn, how did I get here? You know, why am I afraid to say this out loud? Then I feel like I've done something worth doing.
Yeah. You know what I think, as we're winding down our conversation today, one thing I want to say is I'm incredibly proud of who you are, right? Because from the young lady that was sitting in my class as a senior and taking all 3 of my classes, I don't know why you would do that to yourself in any way, shape, or form, but you did. Many folks might call that masochism, but you did. You survived. But the conversations that started in that class that we continue to have, and just this podcast, I've heard pretty much every episode with you and Courtney. I'm kind of sad that Courtney isn't here with us today because I love the conversation, the way that you guys dialogue back and forth. But the fact that you're doing this, that your voice is there, I am so incredibly proud of that. And it makes what I do as an educator worthwhile. No, I don't have the paycheck. Right. And so it's not for the income, it's for the outcome. And this podcast is part of that outcome. Thank you for that, Erica.
Oh, Doc, I appreciate that so much. So in closing, y'all, this is Dr. Keith Wood. This is Academics Meets Accountability. And this has been the Students of Life podcast. Live and learn. Life is a lesson.